Wyoming Territory, June 1883, the storm rolled in just past dusk, low clouds bruising the sky purple as thunder cracked over the Wind River Range. Mason Vickers was splitting kindling behind the barn when he saw the shape streak across his back pasture white dress, tangled hair, barefoot. He dropped the hatchet immediately. She reached the root cellar before he did. He saw the heavy wooden door shift, then slam shut. Whoever she was hiding. He opened it slow, hand on the pistol at his belt. "You all right down there?" His voice echoed into the dark. A pause. Then a woman's voice, tight and shaking. "Please, please do not make me leave. I will explain, just please." Mason stepped back, lowered the gun. She sounded scared out of her skin. "Come on up," he said. "Storm's coming. You can talk inside." There was another pause, then the door inched open. She came out like a deer after gunfire, eyes darting, dress torn and mudded up to the knees. Her face was flushed, hair falling from what had once been an updo. She looked like she had run straight out of a church wedding and into a cattle drive. "I am not going back," she said, breathless. "I would rather freeze out here than go back." Mason took a breath, then offered his hand. "Name's Mason. You can stay the night. You hungry?" She stared at his hand like it might be a trick. Then she took it. "My name is Maeve." He led her through the barn, up toward the cabin, the wind picking up behind them. She kept glancing over her shoulder like she expected a posse to burst through the trees. Mason had seen that look before he had worn it himself once, a long time ago. Inside, he stoked the stove and handed her a blanket. She sat stiff at the edge of the bench, hands shaking. Her dress was lined with lace, but the hem was torn and her heels were raw, not made for running. She did not speak for a while, just stared at the fire and clutched that blanket like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "I was supposed to marry a man named Ellis Brant," she said finally, voice small. "He is twice my age. My father owed him money." She looked up, eyes glassy. "I ran from the church. I do not know where I am." "You're about 10 miles west of Lander," Mason said gently. "This is my place. No one comes out this far." She closed her eyes in relief. "Thank God." He poured her a mug of coffee, slid it across the table. "You got anyone coming after you?" She looked at him. "Probably." He nodded once. "Well, they will have to get past me first." That made her eyes go wide. "Why would you help me?" Mason leaned against the stove, arms folded. "Because I know what it is to lose everything. And I do not like the idea of some bastard hunting a woman down like a deer." He did not mention the rest. Not yet, not the grave markers behind the barn. Not the way his heart had shriveled after that winter 5 years ago when disease took both his daughters and grief took his wife not long after. Love had died in that house, or so he thought. Maeve stayed that night on the cot by the fire. Mason gave her his late wife's nightdress, folded and tucked away in the back of the chest since the day he buried her. He had not touched it in years, but tonight it felt right. She slept like someone too tired to dream. In the morning, she helped him bring in eggs and feed the chickens. She did not ask to go. She did not talk much, but she smiled when he handed her a biscuit and said, "You ever milk a cow?" "I taught girls how to play piano," she said. "So, no," he chuckled. "Well, we are both learning something new." By the third day, she was folding laundry at his kitchen table, humming a melody he did not recognize. She had not spoken of Ellis Brant again, but she had asked about the grave markers. "My daughters," Mason said. "Clara was 6, Caroline was 4. My wife, Hannah, died in her sleep that spring." Maeve touched the edge of the tabletop. "I am sorry," he nodded. "I thought that was the end of everything." She looked at him then, really looked. "But you are still here. Maybe you are the reason why." The words came out before he meant to say them, but they hung between them, quiet and real. That night she sat beside him on the porch swing. The air smelled like sage and pine. Her hand brushed his. She did not pull away. "I have not felt safe in a long time," she said. "You are safe now." He meant it. On the 5th day, a rider came up the trail, a man in a brown suit, dust on his boots. Ellis Brant. Maeve saw him from the window and went pale. Mason stepped out onto the porch before the man could dismount. I think you have something of mine, Brant said. Mason stayed steady. She is not property, she is not yours. I paid her father. She did not agree to it. Brant's lip curled. You hiding her, Vickers? That is kidnapping. I am protecting her. Brant reached for his pistol. Mason was faster. The gunshot echoed through the trees. Brant's hat flew off as he stumbled backward, bullet slicing across his shoulder. Not fatal, but enough. You are not welcome here, Mason said, voice like stone. Brant looked into his eyes, saw something that made him think twice. He turned his horse and rode off, one hand pressed to his bleeding arm. Mason walked back inside, heart pounding. Maeve was standing by the stove, tears in her eyes. You could have been killed. I would do it again. She blinked, stepped closer. Why? He looked at her, really looked. Because I care about you, Maeve, more than I expected to. She reached for him then, hands on his face. I thought I was running from everything, but maybe I was running toward something. He kissed her, slow and sure. Her hands gripped his shirt. He felt his heart hammer in his chest like it had not in years. That night, she did not sleep on the cot. She stayed in his bed, curled against him, her head on his chest. And in the quiet, as the wind moved through the trees outside, Mason knew he had not lost all love. Not anymore. He had found it again, in a woman who ran barefoot into his life and begged for refuge in his root cellar. Morning light filtered through the lace curtain, dust motes drifting like ash in the hush. Maeve sat at the edge of the bed, brushing her fingers along the carved headboard. The warmth of Mason still lingered in the wool blanket pooled at her waist. She tucked her hair back, eyes tracing the grain of the wood, quiet and alert. From outside came the scrape of a shovel against dry earth. She pulled on the woolen skirt Mason had left folded at the foot of the bed and stepped out onto the porch. He was by the shed, turning soil beneath the apple tree, sleeves rolled and shirt damp from the neck down. You're digging, she asked, stepping barefoot onto the cool plank. He glanced up, breath steady. New roots, that tree's near choked itself out, thought I'd try giving it room to breathe. She leaned against the post, arms folded. You're always fixing something. Mason sunk the blade deep, then looked at her, expression unreadable. Some things are worth the effort. Maeve didn't answer. The wind lifted a strand of hair across her face and she let it be. Later, she stood at the workbench inside, examining the scattered tools. She held up a curved handle with a brass end. What's this? Draw knife for shaping wood. I used it to build the crib. His voice caught, so he turned away, reaching for a rag to wipe his hands. She set it down gently. You could teach me, she said. I'm not useless. He rubbed the back of his neck. Didn't say you were. No, but I spent most of my life being told I was ornamental. I'd like to prove otherwise. He met her gaze. All right then, we'll start with a stool, might not be pretty, but it'll stand. That afternoon she clutched the draw knife, brow furrowed as he guided her hand. Don't force it, he said. Let the grain tell you where it wants to go. That sounds like something you say to a horse, she muttered. He laughed, real this time, low and surprised. Might work on you too. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. You think I'm like a horse. I think you're stubborn, sharp-eyed, and don't like being cornered. She tilted her head. That might be the kindest thing anyone said to me. By supper, the stool legs were uneven and the seat slanted, but she ran her hand over the sanded edge with satisfaction. It's got character, she declared. Mason nodded. It's yours. They ate quietly, the fire popping in the stove. She stirred her beans with the back of her spoon, glancing sideways at him. When did you stop expecting anything good to come again? He kept his eyes on his plate. After the third grave, she waited. First time I saw you, I thought maybe you were a ghost, he said, but you bled and flinched and asked for eggs. That's how I knew you were real. She set her spoon down. I didn't think I'd survive past that morning. Not after what I left behind. You did more than survive, he said. You chose something different. Maeve stood and crossed to the window where dusk was settling over the pines. He'll come back, she said. Ellis, not today, maybe not this week. But he'll come. Mason joined her, hands at his sides. Then we'll be ready. If you want to stay. She didn't answer right away. Would you have said that a week ago? No, but I wasn't the same man a week ago, she turned to him. And who are you now? He took a slow breath. Someone who hopes again. She reached for his hand, calloused fingers warm and sure. Then I'll stay until you ask me not to. I won't. The words hung between them, quiet and certain. She stepped closer, the loose hem of her borrowed skirt brushing his boots. Outside, the wind shifted east. The air smelled of river silt and pine bark, and somewhere in the distance, a bull elk called low through the dusk. Inside, two people stood wrapped in something fragile and new, but steady as the land beneath their feet. The mountains still held snow in their upper folds, though the valley had turned soft with spring. Mason watched Maeve from the fence line where the sheep grazed, her apron full of dandelion heads. She walked with her eyes to the ground, lips moving soundlessly as though counting. When she noticed him watching, she brushed her skirt and straightened. I read once that dandelions can ease fever, he nodded. You planning to keep a still room? If I'm to live here, I ought to be useful. You already are. She didn't answer, only looked down at the handful of flowers. I'd like to dry these. There's a room off the kitchen that gets good sun, if that's all right. He stepped down from the fence. You don't have to ask. Maeve moved past him, the scent of crushed greens rising from her apron. I used to dream about a life like this, she said. Not grand. Just real, something I could make with my own hands. Mason followed her to the porch, then paused. There's something I ought to show you. She set the dandelions on the table and met his eyes. What is it? He led her behind the barn, past the old well and down a slope where the grass grew high. There, nestled against the roots of a cottonwood, stood a small structure of stone and timber, half sunken into the earth. The door leaned slightly, weathered but solid. I built it the year after they passed, Mason said. Thought I'd turn it into a smokehouse. Never could bring myself to finish. Maeve stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled faintly of earth and old cedar. It could be a root cellar, she said. A real one. He leaned in the doorway. You'd want to use it after how we met, she turned to him, something steady in her gaze. That night saved my life. I don't want to be afraid of it. Mason nodded slowly. Then we'll fix it up. In the days that followed, they worked side by side. Mason replaced the door with new hinges, and Maeve cleared out the dead branches that had blown in through the cracks. She lined the shelves with burlap and began collecting jars from the nearby general store in town, trading eggs and spun wool. One afternoon, while Mason fitted a new beam across the frame, Maeve sat nearby sorting dried yarrow and wild mint. You ever think about leaving? She asked, not looking up. I did once, he replied. When the house felt too quiet, when I couldn't stand the sound of my own boots on the floor. What stopped you? He adjusted the beam until it sat flush. I didn't know where I'd go. Turns out staying put was harder and braver, she smiled faintly. You think I was brave? I think you were desperate and brave. Both can be true. Maeve lifted her head. I keep wondering what happens when the season turns, when summer gives way to frost. Will you want me to stay? He didn't hesitate. I already do. She set down the jar she was holding and brushed the soil off her skirt. I've never been asked what I want, not once in my life. What do you want? She crossed the space between them. I want to plant garlic in the fall. I want to sleep with the window open. I want to learn the names of every bird that passes through this valley. Mason's hand found hers, rough against smooth. Then we'll make room for all of it. She leaned into him, forehead resting against his collarbone. I don't want to be something you lost and found. I want to be something you choose. He wrapped his arms around her, slow and certain. Then let me choose you, every morning. The wind moved through the tall grass behind them, soft as breath. Neither of them spoke again that day, but when Maeve placed a single jar of dandelion salve on the shelf of the root cellar that evening, she labeled it simply, First. The first frost came early that year, silvering the scrub grass and curling the edges of the cabbage leaves Maeve had coaxed from the soil. She stood in the doorway just after dawn, shawl drawn tight around her shoulders, watching Mason kneel at the fence to mend a broken slat. The cold had settled into the earth overnight, but the sky above was clear and pale, like the inside of a shell. She brought out a mug of chicory brew and wordlessly set it beside him. He looked up, nodded once, then went back to work, jaw tight with thought. "I had a letter yesterday," he said after a while, voice even. "From my sister in Cheyenne." Maeve tucked her hands into her sleeves. "I didn't know you had family still," he shrugged. "We haven't spoken in years. She heard about Ellis. Someone must have sent word. She said I ought to send you back east, said this place isn't proper for a woman born to music and manners." Maeve let the silence stretch between them, then stepped off the porch. "And do you agree with her?" He stood slowly, brushing dust from his knees. "I don't know what's proper anymore. But I know I don't want you gone." She looked out at the pasture, where the sheep moved like clouds over the dry hills. "I didn't know what I wanted the night I ran. I only knew I couldn't keep giving pieces of myself to men who bartered for me like land." Mason's hands flexed at his sides. "You've never owed anyone. I was raised to believe otherwise." She turned to him then, the wind tugging at her skirt. "You've never asked for anything I didn't offer. I'm still trying to understand what that means." "It means I see you," he said quietly, "not what you can do or how you look." "Just you?" She took a slow step closer. "And what do you see now?" "Someone braver than she knows, someone who belongs here if she wants to." A flush crept up her throat, but her voice stayed steady. "I want to stay, but not as a guest." He reached for her hand, rough fingers curling over hers. "Then stay as my equal." That evening, she moved her things into the room at the back of the house, the one Hannah had once filled with quilts and quiet singing. Maeve didn't ask permission. She folded her shawl over the chair, laid her brush beside the basin, and opened the window halfway to let in the scent of snow-damp pine. Mason came to the door but didn't step inside. "I started planning the new shed. Thought we could use more storage come winter." She met his eyes, one hand on the windowsill. He gave a short nod. "If you're here, this place is yours too." She crossed to him, stopped just short. "Do you think we could plant orchard grass come spring? Would help the sheep through lean years." His mouth lifted at one corner. "That your way of saying you plan to be here next spring?" "I'm planning further than that." They didn't kiss that night. Instead, they sat by the fire, her feet tucked beneath her, his boots crossed at the ankle. She stitched a torn hem while he whittled a spoon from aspen wood. No words passed between them for nearly an hour, but the silence was full, not empty. When the fire burned low, Mason reached for her hand. She let him hold it, palm to palm, and neither of them moved to let go. "Not yet." In the quiet, Maeve whispered, "I never thought peace would look like this." Mason looked at her, his thumb brushing the inside of her wrist. "It looks like you to me." The snow came in slow, dry flurries that clung to the porch railings and softened the sound of boots on the steps. Maeve stood in the barn doorway, rubbing lard into the cracked leather of her gloves, watching Mason as he hung the last of the winter lanterns along the rafters. He worked methodically, sleeves rolled, the breath from his nose rising in pale clouds. "You ever think about putting in a bell line?" she asked. He paused at the top of the ladder. "For what?" "Coyotes took 2 hens last night." "If we string wire between the coop and the house, hang a bell from it, we'd know if something passed through." Mason descended, wiping his hands on a rag tucked through his belt. "You've been thinking like somebody who plans to be here next year." Maeve stepped aside so he could pass. "I'm not planning. I already decided." They moved together into the tack room where the air was warmer and the smell of hay and saddle oil soaked the walls. Mason lifted a wooden crate of cured nails and set it on the bench. "You've taken to this place like you were born for it." "I wasn't," she said, tugging her braid over her shoulder, "but I've never been more myself than I am here." He looked at her then, really looked, as though seeing something new in the tilt of her chin or the steadiness in her eyes. "I've been thinking about the land heading north," he said. "Past the rise, it's flat enough to build another cabin." She leaned against the frame of the door. "You planning to rent it out?" "No," he said quietly. "I was thinking we might build it ourselves, together. Make it ours." Maeve's breath caught, but she didn't move. Are you asking me to stay as your partner or as your wife? I'm asking if you'll build a life with me, he said. If that means marriage to you, then yes. I'd be proud to call you my wife. She stepped to him, snow melting in her hair, gloves still tucked under one arm. I never thought I'd want that again, but I do. With you. They said nothing more, but his hand found her waist and she leaned into it, forehead resting against his cheek. Outside, the wind shifted, whistling high through the slats in the eaves. They married in late January, with the county clerk riding out from Lander on borrowed sleigh runners. Maeve wore a dress she'd patched herself, and Mason took the gold band from a chain he hadn't touched since Hannah passed. He didn't speak of it, and Maeve didn't ask. When the vows were done, he placed it on her finger with both hands. That spring, they cleared the north plot, hauling stone and sinking beams. Maeve learned how to mix lime for mortar, and Mason taught her to set joists without warping the grain. They laid the floorboards side by side, hands bloodied and sunburned, laughing when their measurements ran short and they had to shave the planks down again. By midsummer, the cabin stood with its back to the wind and its door facing east, where the sun rose pink over the hills. Maeve planted lavender along the path, and Mason hung a horseshoe above the lintel, iron worn smooth by time. One evening, as the light slanted across the porch, Maeve brought out a folded linen parcel. I found this in a crate behind the stove. Mason unwrapped it slowly. Inside lay a child's bonnet, frayed at the ties but still clean, his breath hitched. Caroline's. Maeve placed her hand over his. We can keep it in the cedar chest or use it. He looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. You want children, I want what comes, she said. If that's a child, I'll welcome it. If not, I'll still have you. He didn't answer in words, only pulled her close, her cheek against his chest, arms wrapped around her like shelter. That winter, the snow came deep and early, but they had laid in enough wood and smoked meat to wait it out in comfort. Maeve spun wool in the evenings while Mason carved handles for the kitchen drawers. They spoke softly, sometimes not at all, letting the warmth of the fire and each other fill the spaces where grief used to live. When spring returned, it brought with it a softness neither had known before, not the sharp edge of survival, but the round fullness of a life chosen and made. Years passed. The orchard grass held through drought, and the sheep bore twins more often than not. Maeve taught a neighbor girl to dry herbs and read seed catalogs, and Mason started a new coop, larger than the last. They never spoke of Ellis Brant again, nor of Maeve's old life, nor of the losses that had once hollowed Mason out from the inside. Those things remained, but they no longer ruled the days. One quiet morning, long after the snow had melted and the cottonwoods bloomed along the creek, Maeve stood on the porch of their home, watching the light spill across the hills. Mason came up beside her, fingers brushing hers. You never told me what you wished for that first night, he said. When you came up from the cellar, she looked at him, eyes warm, face lined with the years they'd shared. I didn't make a wish, she said. I asked for mercy. He turned to her. And did you find it? She nodded once, slow and sure. I found you. They stood together, the sun rising behind them, the land theirs beneath their feet, steady and good. Nothing chased them anymore. Nothing waited in the dark. All that remained was the life they had built, quiet, honest, and whole.